Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. Who said that? Where did that come from? And why would I open this podcast, which is going to be about the AR-15 and how we talk about it? But why would I open this kind of podcast up with something like that? Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. Well, who said that? Well, this is a 2-page letter. It was written in the early wintertime, January of 1819, from one of our former presidents to one of his very best friends. And it's actually interesting if you look at this letter of just how people interacted with and talked with each other back then, and just kind of how friendship was expressed, or how people interacted with each other. It's kind of a walk through time. It's really cool to see that. This is Thomas Jefferson. He sent a letter to his friend Nathaniel McCone. And the letter goes on and talks about some interesting topics in it. I would encourage you to check it out. But towards the end, on the second page, he says, "Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom." Now, why would I open this podcast with that? Well, I think, like I was saying last podcast, we do have the keys to the castle of firearms knowledge. We tend to have that at a very gross disparity compared to the people that we argue with or debate with, exchange ideas with, the people who are in favor of gun control, or, when we start talking about making policy, we start talking about writing bills, at least our interactions with each other. I believe, and maybe not as eloquently put as Thomas Jefferson, but I believe honesty is the best policy. I believe that bad news does not get better with time. I believe that even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's not convenient, and especially even if it comes at great personal consequence or peril, honesty is the best policy. Or as Thomas Jefferson would say, honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. But these things matter, like I said, especially if we're talking about creating national policy. But I'm also talking about your personal friendships, your personal relationships with your friends, your family, romantic partner, your children, whoever you got. Honesty is the best policy, I believe. And not only is it morally and ethically a problem, if people are telling half-truths, people are being intentionally deceptive, people are quibbling, or maybe they didn't necessarily lie, but they didn't quite paint the full picture. So the end result is what they decided to say that was truthful and what they decided to withhold that was not truthful. I don't believe that's helping. I mean, morally, ethically, I have issues with that, but I don't believe it's productive. I don't believe it helps anything. Now, before I get into this, I'm going to say that my thoughts on this, some of you might disagree with the things I'm going to say, the things that I believe in. And it's not that we're on the wrong team. It's not that we believe the end result should be any different. It just means how is the best way. Because my thesis is, my position is, I believe AR-15s absolutely have a place in Joe citizens' hands. Right? Every American gun safe should have one in there if someone so chooses. You can obviously pass a background check and all that, and they would like to have one. They should have one. I do believe it has value for a multitude of reasons, and I think there's absolutely no reason why American citizens should ever be prohibited from owning them. And this also goes for AK derivative rifles or firearms as well. But especially, we're just going to be talking chiefly about the AR-15 here. Honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. What does that mean, though? How are we going to apply it here? I believe, firstly, that you and I have a home field advantage. This is not often discussed, and sometimes it may not be politically correct to discuss it, but I'm going to go ahead and do that because this is my podcast. and I would like to thank you for listening. This is something you're probably not going to hear a lot, but just being objective and looking at our situation, the merits of different arguments, the merits of different ideas. Are they valuable? Are they useful? Are they not? Do they make sense? Do they not? Trying to be very logical, reasonable here. We have a home field advantage because last podcast I talked about we had the keys to the castle of firearms knowledge of how these guns work, that we can look at a firearm and just instantly realize, okay, this is a trap shooting shotgun. It's a BT-99. It's going to be perfect for singles trap. You look at something else, oh, you know what? I would take that to 5-stand. You know, I would shoot skeet with this, but that's not going to work out for trap, especially doubles trap. Oh, I would take that sporting clays. Oh, this is the kind of gun that I would use for a silhouette 22 match at my local range. Oh, this is the kind of gun I would take squirrel hunting, or maybe I go on this awesome Alaskan fishing trip and, you know, oh, this is the kind of gun that I would have like on a shoulder rig holster just for self-defense if I'm dealing with a bear or something like that, if I absolutely needed to. You start looking at different guns, you and I, we can look at these guns and start to see what their design characteristics and features, how they function, at least from a end user standpoint. We can understand these things. We can see what features, characteristics, design aspects, ergonomics, capabilities on these firearms and what they would be best purposed for. And yes, there's guns out there that if I'm in a imminent, close, dangerous, life-threatening, lethal encounter at close range in my home without warning, and it's a multiple attacker scenario, yes, there are certain firearms that I'm going to leave for the trap or skeet range, and there's certain firearms that I would pick up in a minute. And I would absolutely deal with that scenario. And it's all about the features, the capabilities, everything that we know. We have the keys to that castle. And our opposition, those in favor of gun control, making national policy restrictions, legislation against the Second Amendment, they don't have the keys to that castle. But so I talked about that last podcast, but what I didn't elaborate on, or what I didn't move on, which I'm going to talk about now, is we also have the home field advantage. Why do I say that? Because we have the Constitution on our side. We actually have Article 3. We have the Supreme Court and their recent rulings on our side. We have our American history. We also have the law. We have all these things on our side. And if you want to talk about logic, you want to talk about what is reasonable, you want to talk about the task and purpose of the Declaration of Independence, well, also our Constitution as it still stands. All of these things are on our side. You do realize that, right? We have that home field advantage. We have so much on our side. And here's something, going back to something you probably won't hear, and it may not be politically correct to say, but I'm going to say it. I can argue my position any time of the year, whether it's crazy and something crazy just happened in the news, something troubling, horrific, sad, or whether it's just business as usual and nothing's really going on. Any day of the week, any time of year, any month out of the year, no matter up or down, whatever's going on, I can argue my position, and I would say successfully. Our position can survive and stand on its own merits. And we have the home field advantage. We have so much on our side. The gun control camp, you ever notice how the only time we hear about restricting firearms or trying to do, an assault weapons ban or trying to do something crazy like this mandatory, air quotes, buyback program. The only time we hear about stuff like this is when? Well, unfortunately, it's in the immediate wake of something so horrific and evil that now everybody's talking about it. And now it's plastered on every TV screen. You can't even scroll through your Facebook news feed. You can't even hang out just trying to enjoy your evening without getting chimes or dings on your phone. Check it out. You see the news app that just told you what's up. You can't escape it. But the gun control push for legislation, push for more restrictions, more erosion, clamping down, shredding the Constitution, chiefly the Second Amendment, and at large, the Bill of Rights. You only see these things in the immediate horrific wake of when something horrible happens. And I'm going to push the pause button on that. I want you to think about that. And the next thing I'm going to say, which relates to that, is we have a bicameral Congress, right? We got the House and Senate, and the process, which I elaborated on last podcast, but the process for drafting a bill, writing policy, and eventually getting that through the House and the Senate, where they approve and agree on the same version of it, so then they can send it up to Article 2, the executive branch, where the executive may sign it, veto it, desk veto it, play games with it, send it back, and now they have to go back to the drawing board. This process of how this works, of how we make bills into law, that was an intentionally slow and sticky mess. That was intentionally designed. Yes, we all know checks and balances, but what's often not discussed, or what people don't realize that's attached to that, this was an intentionally slow process. As I like to say, at least from my experience in the Army, that everything moves at the speed of government, which is not fast. It is not necessarily efficient. But at least with how we make bills and write policy that become law, that process is and was designed to be an intentionally slow process. Because our founding fathers wanted, if it's going to be something so important that Congress is going to make the law and it's going to go to the executive, they're going to pass it. And now for all the states in the union, on a federal national level, this is going to be the thing now. If it's going to be that important, well, this needs to be something that can be debated, it can be discussed, it can be refined, it can be made better. Right? The opposition to this proposed bill has their chance to argue their points. And the proponents of the bill, they're going to have to deal with those arguments and find a way to assuage their fears or concerns, or come up with the good old American compromise. They're going to have to figure something out, and this is going to take some time. It's going to be refined. But chiefly in here is the idea that this was intentionally supposed to take time and be a process. Not very fast, not very efficient on purpose, because we did not want to pass laws that went by the whims of whatever the public just happened to care about that day. And if it was something that was going to be national policy, if it was something that was going to be worthy of becoming a bill that would go up through our Congress and become an actual law eventually through that entire lengthy process, well, then it needed to be something worthwhile. It couldn't simply just be on the whims of whatever emotional train that we all hopped on at that moment. It had to have merits where it could stand on its own, whether the emotions and everything and the panic and the whims, everything is there, or whether it's not there. This proposed bill or legislation absolutely had to be able to stand on its own merits. And I provide you proof, at least what I would like to submit as evidence of what I'm talking about, when we had the post-Sandy Hook assault weapons ban proposed, right? I mentioned that for a second last podcast. We got the band back together again. Dianne Feinstein talking about those short memories. People thought we were crazy when we would say that, nobody's out there trying to take all your guns. We would say, no, I think that looks to be the kind of the end goal here over time. And short memories, the woman senator from California that is on video saying, she didn't get enough from the 94 assault weapons bill, the crime bill, that, Mr. and Mrs. America, if I could have got them all to turn them in, then I would have. I just didn't have the votes, but I absolutely was gunning for it. On camera saying that, on record. Short memories. Moving forward, we had Dianne Feinstein, that character here, some other characters, drafting a piece of legislation. And that thing took time, because now this is going before our House and Senate. Congress is working on it. And of course, there's opposition. And there's proponents of it. There's opponents. It's arguing. It's debating. People are protesting. And no, I'm not gonna I'm not voting for this. I'm not going to be a yay on this if this is included. No, I'm not doing that. And then other people saying, why won't you do it? It's for the children. All right, but that took time. And by the time it was attempting to make its way out of Congress, it fell apart. It totally lost steam. It was gone. Right? And there were our intellectual opponents, the pro-gun control camp, saying, oh, if we can't get an assault weapons bill passed after Sandy Hook, then we'll never be able to pass one. This is the time. And that was a very particularly evil and horrific shooting. That was horrendous. And even in the wake of that, we still did not pass an assault weapons ban. And why? Because it took time. It was not supposed to be a fast, immediate process. This took time. And once all of the arguments were made, people were throwing it back and forth, it just fell apart. It never happened. And at that time, we had an executive that absolutely would have signed it if it just landed on his desk, which he so desperately wanted, but he never got. Because it took time. It needed to stand on its own merits. The conversation, the debate, the refinement, those things had to happen. And over time, people started to realize once the music stopped, oh, you know what? No, I don't know about this. It didn't make it. Now, in an opposite scenario, pointing to something that did make it, the New York SAFE Act. I think that was, 6 or 7 weeks after Sandy Hook? They jammed that thing through. I think it was a midnight session, closed door, behind closed doors, no cameras, audio, we're going to do this thing. Well, yeah, if you're in a hurry, because you understand the fact. Now, that did pass. That was fast. That was immediate. All right, and I think, to their credit, a lot of our intellectual opponents, part of our American family, but a lot of the pro-gun control people, I don't think even most of them realize what I'm talking about here. I don't think they realize that their own argument, their own position requires emotion. It requires horrific, chaotic, evil, atrocity. It requires the thing that pulls on your heartstrings. It makes you willing to let everything else go. You know what? We just got to do this. I don't even care anymore what the consequences may be. We just have to do it. Their position requires that. Our position does not. And going back to my first original point, we have the home field advantage. Not just having the keys to the castle of firearms knowledge, where most of our opponents do not. But more importantly, we have the Constitution and the law and the Supreme Court on our side. We can argue our points successfully, I would argue. We can argue our points successfully just on its own merits. Our ideas and propositions, our beliefs, the things that we would like to see, the be policy, the beliefs that we have for freedom, the Bill of Rights, individual liberties, our Constitution. All of these things are on our side. We can argue that every day of the week and any time of the year successfully. Because our position can stand on its own merits. And whether they realize it or would like to admit it or not, their position does not. And that is not just my opinion, that's my belief. I believe that, and there's plenty of evidence to support that. Especially, like I just cited, the national, federal proposed assault weapons ban failing because it took so much intentional time versus the New York SAFE Act. That's just one of many examples we can point to. But moving on from that, the whole reason that I mention all of that is because we have the home field advantage. We have things that agree with logic, that agree intrinsically with our beliefs and how this country was founded, the things that we believe in. We have all of these things on our side. Our arguments, our ideas stand on their own merits. We have the home field advantage. We even have the keys to the castle on firearms knowledge. We have so many advantages in our corner as Americans. espousing and believing in American ideals. We already have so much. My argument here is all leading to this. We have no reason to, and there is no excuse for, saying half-truths or lying or trying to distract or taking these keys to the castle that really only we have about firearms knowledge and intentionally trying to hide or mitigate certain things while highlighting other things, trying to be a little shady, trying to be a little shifty. We have no reason to do that. There is absolutely no reason for it. In my lesser eloquent version, I would say honesty is the best policy. As someone much more intelligent than me would say, honesty is the first chapter in the book of wisdom. I believe he was right. So now at this point, I think I've laid the foundation so we can actually start talking about the AR-15. Where does it come from? What is it? Why is it so popular? What's the deal on this whole AR-15 thing? Where did it come from? And I've already laid out the case for why I believe that we, as pro-Second Amendment, pro-freedom, pro-Constitution people, that we don't have to lie or deceive or quibble, kind of hide certain things and highlight other things. I feel like we can unapologetically come out in truth and honesty and just lay our case because we have so many advantages and we are not wrong. I believe that we are not wrong. Going back to another Thomas Jefferson quote that he preferred dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. That might come into question later. But I believe that we have so much on our side, we have no excuse and no reason to. We don't have to. We don't need a crutch of deception. We don't need emotions. We don't need any of that. We have logic, the Constitution, our laws. We have so much on our side. Let's just be forthright about it. And now it's time to talk about the AR-15. What is this thing? Well, going back to the last podcast with the Beto quote, that he was saying we have over 10 million weapons of war. Weapons of war. Is that true? How are we in a situation now where the United States, your United States military, that we serve you, the people of the United States, that we have been using this thing since Vietnam with no end in sight? And how is it that we, at least as the Supreme Court would define, in common use, so we have a rifle that is in the most common use. It is the most prolific, most commonly used rifle or firearm design in our country. That is truth, and it's used for so many things: competition, hunting, self-defense, everything. How did we get here? Because this is undeniably, whether they want to admit it or not, and most of them don't, but the truth, again, the first chapter in the Book of Wisdom here is honesty, and the honest truth is this is America's rifle. How did we get here? Where did this thing come from? What's the deal on the AR-15? This is not going to be a comprehensive, complete, play-by-play history of the AR-15. I don't think most people want that. There's plenty of books, plenty of YouTube videos, people who could do a much better job than me. But a very simple gloss over of it is it comes from the AR-10, and it comes from a company called Armalite, and it comes from men such as Eugene Stoner and Ed Sullivan. Armalite was not and it's very different than the modern Armalite, but Armalite back in the day, the 50s, moving into the 60s, it was not a firearms production company. It was not like Colt or Remington. They were tooled up with the personnel and the budget and the manufacturing capability to mass produce firearms. Armalite was a design house. They had some interesting stuff going on there between aerospace, firearms development, other things. But Eugene Stoner himself was a World War II veteran, an armorer. He was a machinist. He had a mechanical mind. He was an engineer. He kind of had all the ingredients to the recipe required to design such a thing that was ahead of its time, would be my argument. And Ed Sullivan, another brilliant engineer, who actually had a lot to do with the Mini 14, which would come later, which is probably a topic for its own podcast. But sticking to the AR-15, we had guys at Armalite. And at that time, we had recently pushed through, for better or probably worse, the 7.62 by 51 millimeter NATO cartridge. Not the same as the .308 Winchester, but very close. That's probably a whole separate podcast right there. But we had just pushed that through, and now all NATO countries were going to be adopting and utilizing this new cartridge. And at the time, we had, I don't know if I want to go as far to say a product improved version of the M1 Garand, or Garand, more properly pronounced. But we had the M14, which is its own, I don't want to say mess, but it's its own situation. This forged steel receiver, walnut stock, this steel and wood old school battle rifle kind of situation. It was big, it was heavy. And they were thinking, well, what if we took the same cartridge, but we used modern alloys with aluminum, we used composite materials, we developed a design that would be inherently beneficial for military use. We can maybe make something that would be a better offering as a battle rifle for the military that would utilize this cartridge, but it would be lightweight. It would allow the soldier something that was more handy, easier to carry. He could carry more ammunition for the same weight cost. Now, actually, all these things are going to matter when we get to the AR-15, but there's a lot of politics. It gets a little sticky. We start looking at the old school ideas in the Ordnance Department and the Department of Defense and the old military generals, the people that thought the M1 Garand was the most awesome thing ever, which it is a great rifle. And I love mine, don't get me wrong, but now that we have this 7.62 NATO, which is a little bit shortened down from the old 30-06, and maybe M14 is the best way to go, and we're not interested in these modern alloys and composite materials. A real true battle rifle is steel and it's wood and it's produced at a government arsenal like Springfield Armory, maybe some contractors out there, Winchester, whatever, trying to boost up production. But that is a proper battle rifle. Some people didn't want to hear it, didn't give it an honest, fair shake. But now we have characters like General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force, some other things that were happening where they basically approached Armalite and said, hey, this AR-10 thing, I think we got some potential here, but is there a way that you can maybe downscale this, kind of scale it down to more intermediate rifle cartridge? Is there a way you can even make this lighter, more handy, the ammunition that it fires? Maybe, if a soldier has this much weight that he's carrying, well, is there a way you can make the rifle and the ammunition, everything, lighter so he can carry more ammunition, and the weapon itself is more handy, easier to wield, easier to carry? So they went back to the drawing board. Eugene Stoner, Ed Sullivan, the designers, engineer team at Armalite, they went ahead and scaled it down. And then they came up with the Armalite rifle, Model 15. And this was essentially an AR-10 that was scaled down, and now it was going to shoot in the .22 caliber range, a .223 Remington cartridge. They had to help enhance, develop that as well. It went to testing. There was also some politics and a little bit sticky there with the red tape, the people that did not want to accept this. And not only are we looking at composite materials, aluminum alloys, it doesn't look or feel like a proper battle rifle, but now we're dealing with something that is sub 30 cal. Some people didn't even want to hear that. They didn't want to see it. But despite the opposition, just for what it was, and not looking ahead or giving it an honest look, some people in the Department of Defense did. And they said, well, hey, this is a winner. Now, AR-15s, yes, Armalite produced AR-15s, went overseas with our advisors. Now, this is before Vietnam actually really kicked off. We were sending advisors to train, equip, and accompany in combat and live with the South Vietnamese forces of Vietnam that were fighting the communist regime. But we sent advisors out there. We gave them AR-15s with this new cartridge, new rifle. Check it out. Here you go. And they absolutely loved it. It was an immediate success. And yes, if you actually look at some of these rifles, the receiver itself, produced by Armalite, In other words, it has, the model name is AR-15, safe semi-auto, property of U.S. government. And getting back to the honesty equation, have you ever heard people say, oh, the AR-15 has never been used by the U.S. military. It's not a combat weapon. It's semi-automatic only. You would be, some people have gone as far to say, you would be a fool to use an AR-15 in combat or to take that to war. It's not a weapon of war. And you know what? The truth is, that's not true at all. It was inherently designed for war and combat, in which case it exceeds very well, to the point that we still, to this day, use it. We'll use it. What am I talking about? Civilians have AR-15s, and the military has M16s, M4s, Mark 12s, Mark 18s. Those are all different. What I have is a semi-automatic only. What are you talking about? So from a firearms and nomenclature design standpoint, the AR-15 derivative, the pattern, the original parent-host design, it's an AR-15, whether in Afghanistan I had an M4 carbine, safe semi-burst. In Iraq I had a M4A1 carbine, safe semi-auto. In my own personal property, which we've already been over in the first podcast, I have AR-15s that are mechanically only semi-automatic only. They can only fire one shot at a time. They don't have that third option. They are not select fire, not capable of burst or auto. And those are the AR-15s you guys have as well. But the parent-host design is the same. It's the same thing, and you may find it. Maybe it's a Bushmaster. It's an XM15 or a BFCA-15. That's the technical model name. Maybe might be an Anderson, an AM-15. Maybe it's an Aero Precision. Maybe it's a Colt AR-15, A2, Colt H-Bar, an LE6920. At least on the receiver it says M4 carbine. Whatever is roll marked and stamped on the side of it, and whoever forged it or brings it to final production standard, it is the parent host AR-15 design. And the ones that we have in the military are capable of burst or full auto, and the ones that we the people have are only possible of having semi-automatic only. But does that matter, though? And we're going to get to that. But getting back to what I was saying, yes, the AR-15 was designed for combat. It has features on it that are easy for armorers in the field to swap out. The barrel, everything else coming off, not necessarily conducive to accuracy, at least originally designed. However, because of the AR-15's modular and very capable design, it lends itself well for the enhancements, CNC machines, everything else that we eventually started to use and come up with. And it lends itself really well for competition, for accuracy with some internal modifications. And then, the prevalence, the introduction of the 1913 mil standard rail, that we can have railed uppers. We can put optics on it. We can do free-floated hand guards and things that make it more conducive for accuracy, competition, sport, hunting. So the design itself, maybe it was not originally intended for those things, but it lends itself very well to those things. It's no surprise to me, understanding, again, keys to the castle, understanding the design and what's out there and what people would like to do for peaceful, lawful use of their firearms. It makes sense to me that the AR-15 is going to be something that is going to be the most common, or as we would say, the majority opinion, 2008 case, the Supreme Court, the common use. It is extremely in common use because it is the most common rifle, because it lends itself well to all of these other purposes. You want to take a deer hunting, you can get yourself a AR-10 variant, 243. Do some 300 blackout with your AR-15 lower. You can swap uppers. You can put different optics on it. You can take it to the silhouette match, the long range or service rifle competition. You can take it to 3-gun, which is where everyone uses one there. You could take it hunting, everything. And yes, home defense personal defense. Oh yes, you can use it for that as well. But yeah, the AR-15, that is true. It was designed to be a weapon of war. And in that capacity, from a firearms design and nomenclature standpoint, yes, the U.S. military, we still have M16s, M4s, and other variations thereof. And on the civilian side, you have different manufacturers that make it semi-automatic only. But here's the dirty little secret. And anybody, and I'm chiefly going to talk specifically about 11 series, infantry series in the Army, or 03 series, grunts, combat arms, infantrymen, where weapons are kind of a pretty critical part of our job. We're not a paperwork clerk. We're not a cook or a mechanic. We are combat soldiers or Marines. We are grunts. That is our job. That is our task and purpose. To close with, engage, and destroy the enemies of the United States of America in close combat. And whether you're wearing an Army uniform or a Marine uniform, if you're an 11 series or an 03 series, you know what I'm talking about. The United States military, our weapons are capable of burst or auto, depending on what it is. You know, M16A2, M16A4. Maybe it's a M4 carbine or an M4A1. Maybe it's one of the Block 1 or 2s, SOCOM, whatever. Yeah, our rifles are capable of full auto or burst, depending on what it is. But those of you who have served, especially combat arms, what is the primary mode or function that we use our issued weapons in? Semi-automatic, right? Because we know that you are more effective, that a trained soldier or Marine is more effective by placing accurately aimed shots on semi-automatic and controlling his rate of fire and saving ammunition, because we know that if you put it on burst or auto and you just start dumping rounds, when you get into a tick or that first round cracks of your head and it's on, you put that thing in auto and just waste all this ammunition. At least from a carbine or rifle in your hands, it's not a dedicated machine gun. It's not something that has a bipod that is designed for that purpose. You can lock it down on a tripod or a T&E, traverse and elevation. I'm not going to get into machine gun theory here, but we do have weapons for that purpose. M249 SAW, my favorite, the M240 Bravo or M240 Lima, the Mark 48, the Mark 46. We do have things for this purpose that you can mount on a vehicle. You can carry dismounted over miles, and it sucks, but it has a task and a purpose. That is a dedicated, full auto, belt fed, actual machine gun. And when you utilize it properly with the bipod, everything else it has, you're going to be able to get some stuff done on full auto. Absolutely. Talking about a beaten zone. Again, not trying to get into machine gun theory, but just the long story short is if I have targets at 600 meters and I have full auto and I'm trying to successfully engage those targets, I'm going to have a lot better time with an actual machine gun that I can set down on a bipod that has some pretty significant weight to it, that was built for that purpose. It has features on that gun or part of that gun that make it better for that purpose. And I can actually, with some pretty significant degree of accuracy, especially if it's on a tripod, you sandbag it down and put a T&E, traverse and elevation on that. Maybe you even have your range card, you got your ranges, your settings on the T&E, you got everything set down. That gun is going to perform very effectively at that purpose, even at distance. Something, a carbine or a rifle in your hands that has the capability to do that, at least 30 rounds at a time, it's not going to be as effective. You can't feasibly, realistically control it, especially if we're talking any distance really at all. You're just going to waste ammo. Those rounds are just going to fly everywhere. Nothing's really going to happen, as opposed to if you purposely stuck to semi-auto only, which is how we are trained, and we've seen it for ourselves. You are much more effective on semi-automatic as opposed to if you just flipped it on the third switch, burst or auto, and just went for it. And now you just wasted your combat load, 7 magazines gone in the first 2 minutes of this engagement. Maybe this firefight's going to last for 4 hours. You don't know that. So if we are trying to save ammo, we are trying to place more effective, more accurate shots, we are trying to be more successful with our issue rifle or carbine, we are going to purposely use semi-auto. And that's a fact. I remember infantry OSA, one station unit training. In the Army, we do basic training and our AIT, our job training, advanced and visual training. At least infantry, that's a one big thing. One station unit training is one long haul experience. From day one, we have the same drill sergeants. We do the whole thing the whole time as infantrymen. And at OSUT, Fort Benning, one of my fellow recruits, it accidentally went on burst. He wasn't intending to at an M4 range we were doing during white phase, very rifle heavy, shooting heavy phase of infantry OSUT. Accidentally went on burst. The drill sergeant went up to him, kicked him in the ribs, and told him, "You put that on semi-automatic." And you know what? That was not just a basic training thing. When I got to my unit, every M4 range we did, it was always semi-automatic. And in fact, stateside and overseas, Iraq and Afghanistan, I've never put it on auto or burst. That was never part of my training, but that's also, I just know that is not the most effective way to utilize that weapon system in my hands. If I want to do actual full auto things, I'm going to get behind a 240 or a 249, a weapon designed to do that with actual accuracy at distance, at least a beaten zone. That's what that weapon is purposed for. But the carbine or rifle in my hands, I know I'm not going to be doing anything real or effective on burst or auto. I'm going to use semi-automatic. And that is, I think, probably the dirty little secret. That you have the keys to the castle. And there's people on our side that believe, as I do, that everybody should have AR-15s if they want one and they could pass the background check, all that good stuff. I believe it should be something that we, the people, should have. That's not even a question. And some of those people that are in my camp, and that's great, but they like to skirt around the fact that the most effective way, if you ask professional soldiers or Marines, grunts, combat personnel in your United States military that we serve you, if you ask us through our training and experience, we will tell you, yeah, semi-automatic is the way. That is how you do stuff on an AR-15 derivative, whether it's an M4, M16, Mark 12, Mark 18, a BFCA-15, XM15, whatever it is, semi-automatic is the way. That's the truth. And there seems to be this distinction out there. Oh, well, my AR-15 is just one shot at a time. You know, it's not one of those full auto select fire. You know, that's part of, the NFA registry, transferable full autos. We're not talking about that. Those are already regulated. I'm just talking about my semi-automatic only AR-15. That's a totally different thing. Well, capability-wise, it is, because it's not able to go to the third switch, burst or auto, but really from a practical, efficient, functional standpoint, or would you even be using that anyway? Ask your Marines and your soldiers, your infantrymen, your grunts. Ask us, we will tell you, no, we're not using the third switch. We are using semi-automatic. That's how we were trained, and that's what we know is most effective. So what I'm saying is, effectively speaking, yes, our privately owned civilian legal semi-automatic only AR-15 variants that are purposely semi-automatic only, if you're using it in the only mode that it has, semi-automatic, and we in the military are using it on semi-automatic, even though we have a third option, but we intentionally, purposely choose to use it in semi-automatic, well, then what I'm telling you is, if you're putting two and two together here, is we have essentially, effectively, the same thing. And from a firearms and nomenclature standpoint, an AR-15, this pattern, this host-parent design, it is evident and has 98% parts commonality. Whether it says M4A1 carbine, property of U.S. government, Colt marked on the lower, or whether it says AM-15, semi-auto only from Anderson, whatever it is, when we are utilizing it, whether you're asking a trained soldier or Marine, or whether you're asking a civilian who's spent some time at the range with semi-auto, the only thing he can tap into, when you ask both camps of people, you will get the answer that semi-auto is the way to go, and that's what we do. And that's just a fact. Now, I admit my bias. I'm a guy who thinks the 1934 National Firearms Act is complete garbage. It was not passed in good faith as a piece of legislation. If you actually read through it, it's horrendous. And I don't even know why it was written that way. Not even a good piece of legislation by way of just how legislation is written, kind of the standard that we expect. The task and purpose, the thesis behind it was garbage. I think it's so ridiculously antiquated anyway. On top of the fact, I think morally, ethically, and just looking at our Constitution, I think is wrong. So you're talking to a guy, listening to a guy that I don't believe in the 1934 NFA. I think it's trash. It needs to be repealed. I don't believe the 1986 Miller Amendment that stopped the creation of new machine guns to be transferred in the registry. I think all of it's just trash. It's garbage. Should have never happened in the first place, says me. So admittedly, you're talking to a guy who does not have problems with civilians having full auto. If you want to waste rounds, not hit anything, just have fun at the range, though, it's your right to own these firearms, whatever. If you have the budget to supply the ammunition to do that, and you're having fun on the range or just want to see what's up, but okay, whatever. Why does that bother me? How does that violate my rights by you lawfully exercising yours? I don't see what the big deal is. But it seems like the big spooky factor here is full auto. This needs to become a distinction. We have to talk about it. Oh, no, mine doesn't do burst or auto. Mine is just semi-automatic only. And I'm the guy asking, well, why do I care? What's the difference? Why are we even making a distinction when we're talking about legislation that should never have been passed, should not exist anyway? Why is that even important or critical to this discussion? And especially knowing that we do have in the military the option to use burst or auto, and we train to and purposely do not use it because we want to be effective. Okay, so why do we need to make that distinction? Why does it even matter? Is my question. Now, have you heard some people say, going back to the half-truths, oh, the AR-15, you'd be a fool to take that to combat. Well, I don't think I was a fool carrying an M4A1 in Afghanistan or Iraq. I don't think I'm a fool that I did that. And yeah, mine happened to be capable of auto and burst. No, I never used it in that fashion, intentionally by choice. I don't think I was a fool. I don't think the original advisors in Vietnam that were assisting the South Vietnamese before that war really kicked off, I don't think they were fools walking around with what appeared to be M16s, but looking at it, AR-15, property of U.S. government, 223. I don't think they were fools for that. In fact, they loved it because it was designed for combat. And in that purpose, it excels. And you know how we can use that on a civilian side is, going back to the multiple attackers in my home, imminent close range lethal encounter. And maybe we have multiple attackers in the home who have guns or knives, weapons. They're not coming in there to give me a surprise birthday party. They are there for nefarious intentions. All bets are off. I don't know what's going on here. I just want to live, protect my family. Yeah, the AR-15 has some pretty significant value. And if I'm in that kind of situation, whether I'm in uniform overseas or I'm a civilian in my own home, I do not want a fair fight. I want to equip myself with the best tool for the job, and in my estimation, an AR-15 is an ideal tool for the job. Remember years ago, Department of Homeland Security was purchasing just huge amounts of ammunition. Everybody was freaking out. That was like the big thing. And everybody was talking about why are they purchasing all these AR-15s? Why are they purchasing all this ammo? And they said, I think correctly, they identified the AR-15 as the ideal personal defense weapon. And I said, well, that's the first thing I've heard that makes sense in a long time, because I agree with that. I don't think they were wrong. And after my experiences and the things I know, I would definitely double down on that. Yeah, AR-15 is ideal for that purpose. And if I got people in my home, I don't know what's going on here, but I know it's a problem. It's a lethal, imminent attack, a threat on my life, my family. I don't want to be grabbing a double-barreled shotgun doing the Joe Biden special, discharging 50% of my firepower into the air so I can pick up a discharging firearm within city limits charge and worry about, was that buckshot? What goes up must come down. Which leads me to another point, kind of a sidebar discussion here, but if you are not a instructor, you have not been in a lethal encounter with a firearm, you do not understand these things, or at least even if you've never been in a real situation, you understand the dynamics of a lethal encounter. You understand firearms. You understand these things. You are not in the business of telling people what the best tool for the job is to save their life. Right? I don't know anything about baseball. Should I go up there and go talk to professional baseball players? Go try to tell a team or a coach, go tell someone, oh, this is what you need to do to throw a better pitch. Or this is how you're going to win the game. I don't know anything about baseball. Do I have any business advising anybody anything about baseball? So maybe I should just kind of shut up on that. Or if I do want to be in the business of doing that, maybe I need to learn a couple things about baseball. Maybe I need to go play the game. Maybe I need to go understand what is exactly going on here. All right. So at the end of the day, it's frustrating. People that recommend certain things, they don't understand the right tools for the job. They don't know what's out there. I would say the AR15 is the right tool for the job. It's a very successful option if you are interested in lawful self-defense, protecting yourself and your family, and as a byproduct, on the side, you want to enjoy recreational shooting. You want to have something that has light recoil, something that has an adjustable stock. You can get the wife in on it. Kids can shoot it, of course. All the safety is there, under supervision, teaching principles of firearm safety. But you know what I'm saying? Which kind of moves into the next point about the AR-15 and really Second Amendment as a whole. Like I said, this Beto quote that I mentioned in my first podcast, these over 10 million weapons of war in our homes. I don't see a problem with that. Okay, I happen to believe, this is my belief, and again, I believe I have the home field advantage, and I can argue this any time of year. I believe that the Second Amendment was not written and enshrined in our founding document, our Constitution, as an inalienable natural right of mankind, something that we held to be self-evident, something endowed to you by your Creator, so important that we enshrined it on our Bill of Rights in our Constitution. I do not believe the Second Amendment was put there and made of particular mention by our founding fathers for the purpose of going hunting on Saturday. I do not believe the Second Amendment was put and included on our list of essential individual liberties in the form of our Bill of Rights so we could go plinking after work on Friday. The Second Amendment, if you actually read it, and something that nobody does, but actually understand the context of these words, the English language, as practiced in the American colonies back in 18th century, what would later become America, that form of English is not the same as it is today. It requires a little bit of unpacking to understand this. Oxford English Dictionary, it'll tell you the definition of words, but you can also check out the meaning of words as it has changed over time. Beginning back to the point, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm not going to unpack that whole thing, but I am going to bring to your attention something of particular note, at least to me. To keep and bear arms. Well, to keep arms, was that to possess, to have, the right of the people to keep, to have, to possess, to own, to be in possession of. and bear arms. In the 18th century, when we're talking about to keep and bear arms, you didn't bear arms to go hunting. You didn't bear arms to go target shooting. To bear arms was a very military context, has a very militant kind of connotation attached to it. You don't bear arms to go hunt turkeys with that whole a well-regulated militia part of it. All right, so the point that I'm getting at, and I don't know how successful I'm being here, but I'm trying to say, my argument is that the Second Amendment was not there so we can go hunting on the weekends. Second Amendment is not there so we can go target shooting or go compete in three-gun. These are all really cool and really fun byproducts of having the Second Amendment, because we are keeping our arms, and in the event that we would have to bear them in a militia context, we the people. But on the meantime, thankfully in peacetime, we can use these things, we can keep them, we can use them for other things too. All these things are byproducts of the actual task and purpose of the Second Amendment, which, yes, we the people were to have firearms, our own purchased and private property, lawfully possessed firearms for the purposes of self-defense. And that could be you in your home, individual self-defense, or for your family. But that could also be we the people defending ourselves against something like King George brought to bear on the colonists and our original founding fathers. That's the point I'm getting to. The Second Amendment is not here for hunting, yet it has a very intentional task and purpose, and just in the writing itself, to bear arms. So the grand scheme of things, trying to tie all of this together, is to say that yes, in its development history, the AR-15 was designed, it was trying to be marketed to the Department of Defense for military contracts or use. In that purpose, it served well. So well, to the fact that we're still using it in the military. And civilians have picked up on it. We have millions of them among we the people. And the design lends itself very well to byproducts of having a Second Amendment, that we can do hunting, competition, target shooting, all that. But yeah, the original intent of it was to be a weapon of war, and in that purpose it excels well, which is my argument coming forward and saying, then why would you say we the people should not have it, considering the original purpose of the Second Amendment? That is where this whole podcast leads to. And in summary, the Second Amendment is not there so we can go hunting. It was there for we the people to defend ourselves, yes, up to and including our own government, should it ever become tyrannical like King George was doing to our colonists, our founding fathers, that created this entire country to begin with. And in that purpose, I'm not interested in strictly just having things that are suitable for squirrel hunting or hunting deer. I'm interested in we the people having things that are suitable for that purpose, which, yes, would include the AR-15, and I am unapologetic about that. I believe Americans should always have access to ARs, and also, yes, AKs, things like that. But again, this is chiefly about the AR-15. Yes, people should have access to that. I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for my beliefs about the Second Amendment, of why it was penned and included on our Bill of Rights. I don't apologize for the fact I do believe, the AR-15 is different. Okay, and that was my original point in the beginning of this, is I don't think we have any excuse or reason to be disingenuous or try to hide certain things or be shady about the fact that, yeah, the AR-15 was designed for war. It excels in that purpose. It's a little bit different than your Ruger 1022, right? People out there saying, on my side, that are pro-Second Amendment, pro-AR-15s, saying, oh, it's just a 22 caliber rifle. You would be a fool to take it to combat. It's semi-automatic only. It can't even fire burst or full auto. Okay. Now, is that necessarily going to pass the truth test? Technically, yeah. The barrel, the bore diameter is within the 22 caliber range. .224, I think, is projectile size. Metric, 5.56 millimeter. Yeah, it's within the 22 caliber range, but is it, is the insinuation here that we're trying to compare it to a Ruger 1022 or a Henry lever action 22 LR? Is the AR-15 in its standard 5.56 223 caliber, is that really a fair comparison to try to throw it in the same camp as a 22 LR rifle? The answer is no. That's not truthful. Would you be a fool to take it to combat in any of its various forms? No, I don't think I was a fool for it. I loved my M4 and M4A1, and I love my personal AR-15s. And no, I don't think the advisors initially going to Vietnam and then, eventually when the M16 got perfected and made some improvements to it in the form of the M16A1, I don't think our soldiers and Marines, I don't think they were fools in Vietnam for carrying an M16. And in fact, after the improvements were made and that system was now functional, I think you'll find a lot of people who enjoyed it and would rather do that over an M14. I don't think we were fools for taking that to Panama, Grenada, Gothic Serpent, before that, Desert Storm. I don't think we were fools for that. I don't think the American people are fools for wanting an AR-15 for personal defense. And also the byproduct of all the recreational and hunting, everything else. Well, it's only semi-automatic. We already have bans on full autos and things like that. Well, my question is why? I think it's garbage. I've already said that. I think that's total trash because really, if you ask your military, we serve you, and you ask us, you put us on the spot and ask questions. Those of us, combat arms, grunts, infantrymen, you ask your professional soldiers and Marines, what do we use? What do we train? And what do we prefer intentionally to use? It's going to be semi-automatic. And that's just the fact. And I don't apologize about that either. That's just the truth. So some of my fellow pro-gun people disagree that we should say things like that. And disagree that maybe, we still, maybe we can still try to, kind of mitigate the AR-15 and really not talk about what it is. And for me, I think honesty is the first chapter in the Book of Wisdom. Or in my own words, honesty is the best policy. I already have enough advantages in my corner. I've got the law, the Constitution, our heritage, our Bill of Rights, and the Supreme Court. I got everything on my side. I don't need to be making lies here. I don't need to try to distract or dissuade or try to, do smoke and mirrors or anything. I'm going to come out very unapologetically and just tell you what the deal is. I don't feel like I need to do that stuff at all. I don't need emotions. I can argue my point any time of year. I don't need emotions. I don't need lies. I don't need deception. I can come at you with the truth and with all of these things in hand and unapologetically state my case. And I believe that I can successfully do that any time of year. Only armed with the Constitution and truth. I can show up to that fight, to that debate, and I can argue my points. I don't need emotion. I don't need half-truths. I got everything I need, chiefly being the truth. That is my proposition, is that we refocus in on the original intent of the Second Amendment. You don't have to invent anything. How many people have read the Federalist Papers? Maybe not as many. Definitely worthwhile. It's kind of the backstory on it. But even beyond that, how many have read the Anti-Federalist Papers? Both of which were arguing in favor of or against adopting a constitution. It's kind of a sales pitch, if you will, but really what they were was the backstory on how our Constitution was even founded. And therein you might find some interesting things with regard to an intentionally armed and free populace and what the whole intent was on this whole Second Amendment concept. You might find some interesting things if you read a little bit. That's what I would say to my opposition. If they don't want to do the work, they want to take a little soundbite and run with it. Well, that's only going to take them so far. It's kind of a, at least when I have intellectual conversations with people, there's a certain level of maturity and a certain expectation for truth and factual information, things you can cite, things we can talk about. If you're showing up with lies or emotion or a 10-second soundbite or whatever, that's not going to cut it, okay? This is the big kids table. We're talking real policy, American ideals, things that are important, that matter. And you're dealing with an American who's very unapologetically pro-freedom. So you're going to have to deal with that. You can throw little sound bites, lies, deception, emotion, whatever you want. It's not going to work, okay? You don't understand what I have on my side. That is the argument that I'm making. I'm curious what your thoughts are and how you feel about this. What is any constructive criticism or thoughts you have? I think we just need to be totally honest. We have so much on our side. Unapologetically, just believing in American ideals, the free enterprise, individual liberties, our Constitution. These things matter. And I don't think we need to try to hide or conceal anything. Just be upfront about the fact this is the deal. And yeah, I believe people should have AR-15s. I have zero problems with that, and I encourage it. So these are my thoughts. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you came here expecting a full detailed history on the AR-15, I'm sorry that you were let down. That's not going to be me. There's so much great literature and videos, channels out there that can do that for you. These are just one guy's opinions on the AR-15 and some other things that kind of tie into it, and how we talk to our intellectual opponents who are still part of our American family. We are attacking bad ideas. We're not attacking people. They're still part of our American family. Maybe they don't see things the way you do. Maybe they don't. Well, they definitely don't have the keys to the castle, but maybe they're not seeing the grand picture of things. So maybe this can help you in your discussions, in your travels with people who are on the other side of the spectrum when it comes to the Second Amendment. So hopefully it's been productive. I thank you so much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. And let me know if you got any future topics you'd like me to talk about. I got other things kind of on the docket here. But I'd like to hear from you. What do you think? But anyway, thank you for being here. Appreciate you listening.